All right, y'all, welcome to the show. Got a big show for you guys today. It is July 30th, live here on YouTube. July 30th, 2026. Of course, we are high top. Yet again, another warm day here in Jacksonville, Florida. Kind of like yesterday a little bit, we did get some storms late last night. Very uncharacteristic, especially around this time. They usually got our storms in from this time of the day all the way until when the sun goes down. But yesterday, the weather was kind of bizarre, so we were clear all day, but then we got storms in the evening, which is kind of odd. Right before midnight too, which is very, very, very odd. But anyway, enough about the weather. Of course, as per usual, it is hot, humid out there. But anyway, welcome to the show. We are live again on YouTube, of course, on Spotify. For everyone, this is of course episode 190 of the Four Oracles podcast. Over the last few days, I've been doing a lot of these pre-recorded shows. As I've been telling you guys, well, this will be our last live show for a little bit. Doesn't mean we're going anywhere. No, we'll still be having shows out. They just won't be live. Pre-recording. I've already done two. I have one coming out later this week. We'll have another one coming out next week. The show later this week will be on 4th of July. So no Thursday show. It'll be a special Saturday show for some of you who are watching the premiere. But anyway, that is happening. So no live shows for me for the next few weeks. Rest of this week and then much of next week. But we will have our pre-recorded shows, and we'll be back to the live shows here around the week of. Let me check my calendar on my phone. Let's double check here. I believe it'll be on the 14th is when will be our next show that will be not recorded. So how about that? Anyway, I will also be recording a extra pod either after this show or tomorrow morning or something. So just keep an eye out for that. Trying to get the clips out for the last extra pod we just did. So bear that in mind. Some of those might be coming out a little bit later than usual, but that's going to be okay. Anyway, of course, the season starts in about 6-7 days from now, I believe. So we're getting ever so close to week one. Now, week 0 is even closer than that. That's around 54 days or something. Anyway, what I'm trying to to say is that the season will be here pretty soon. So, yeah, especially this month of July is going to be very, very busy. Yes, we are technically will have any live shows for the next few weeks, or not the next few weeks, but the next week or so. We will be busy with a lot of things coming out, even non-football related stuff. We have San Diego Comic-Con, where we'll get some Marvel news with Doomsday and other things about the MCU. And also, Spider-Man A Brand New Day coming out in about a month or so, less than a month. So, nice perk up there a little bit. So, a lot of things to discuss all the way up until the kickoff of the season, of course, with college football. But anyway, if you're new here to the show, we do this show again, typically live Tuesday and Thursdays again for the next week. About 8 days or so. No live shows, but we will have pre-recorded shows. But we talk about college ball on this show, and of course, any other meaningful topics that require breaking news, we'll pop those in to the big show. But then there's the extra pod, which is Spotify only, but we do put the individual clips onto YouTube. So for those of you who just want to watch those clips and not go to Spotify for the actual full extra pod, which I'll recommend you do, but it is your your choice there. So anyway, let me go to my show notes here. Again, we have a very interesting show today. We have college football's most despised programs. Who are they? What are those programs? I'll list them out to you guys. At least the ones I believe should be on there. You can decide amongst yourselves about that. Then there's also Deion Sanders' future at Colorado. What does that look like? And then one to show with 2026 team record projection for Texas A&M. Mike Yoko and company. So we'll be doing that here momentarily. Get some water real quick. Make sure to hydrate as per usual on this time of the year, or any time of the year, especially this time of the year. So all right, moving right along. By the way, yes, we are on Restream, our typical streaming platform. Don't have a lot of graphics for you guys, so it'll be kind of a mixture of old school and what we've been doing lately. We'll have our record projection graphic for A&M, but the other topics don't really need graphics, if you will. They're kind of self-explanatory, I think. So just keeping that in mind. First topic on the show. Actually, double check. Is this the right notes? This is not. Make sure this is not the pre-recorded show notes. Okay, these are the live show ones. College football's most despised programs. Who are the programs that could be the most hated programs in the country? Who are they? Well, I have about 6 programs on here that I believe that would be categorized in this area of college football. Now there could be more on here. This is not a an exhaustive list of like 10 plus teams. We'd be here forever doing that. But I figure we'll just give you a few of I feel around 6 teams I believe would fit this category, particularly around this for this year probably. Maybe not so much like all the time. Like if you were doing all the time, there would be some other teams on here that I don't have on here now that would be on here for sure. First one here, this one kind of obvious, is LSU with Lane Kiffin. This one would be on here. Of course, the whole the Lane Kiffin saga with him leaving Ole Miss and the whole will he won't he leave, and then the LSU job opens. People thought originally, oh, he's going to go to Florida and take over for $1 billion after he got fired. Well, it turned out he was going to LSU. He's there now. A lot of controversy off the field, particularly with Mr. Lane, both regarding the coaching search and how he handled it, and some other things that have come out that I really don't care to discuss because it doesn't really relate to football. Not really a dime of my time we wasted on that. But even beyond that, Lane being a polarizing figure as he is, I think LSU being a type of program that, well, at least with this year and next year, and we've mentioned this ad nauseum about how there is an expectation for them to win now and to win big immediately. Why? Because their schedule is very friendly for them. Okay, like there's a reason a lot of folks bring up, oh, you want to play, particularly in the SEC, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Auburn, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. Those are your 5 teams you want to play this year. Not because I think Auburn's a dumb program. And the reason why they're included is just as of right now, they're not really a program that would really scare me at this point, especially with the multiple coaching changes and the talent roster depleting very quickly. So that is true with LSU for the next 2 years, actually. That their schedule is very, very friendly, and they'll be playing some figure of those teams on the schedule. And you should win those games. At least I would imagine you would. So not only do you have Lane Kiffin's antics on the field, off the field, over the years saying, get your popcorn ready, or, going to a post-game press conference after losing to Alabama at Ole Miss, cussing and acting very, very, very much like he is doing a Nick Saban impression, which is very weird. To some people, to me, I don't really care that much. In some ways, it's, coaches can handle themselves how they want to a certain extent when it comes to losing a game that you thought you were going to win. But anyway, I digress. LSU should be on here for sure. This one to me makes a lot of sense given Lane's being how Lane Kiffin's very polarizing. LSU is a very polarizing program. A good program for sure. I mean, they have a lot of hubris built up, but a lot of it's earned given that besides Brian and Kelly, Mr. Brian Kelly, that most coaches in the modern era of LSU, starting with Nick Saban and going all the way to Ed Orgeron, have won national titles or been to national titles. So that's kind of the air that Lane Kiffin is entering into at LSU, and that Brian Kelly entered into but couldn't handle it himself, and ultimately was his demise there in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So LSU would be probably, at least with this year, would be up there as a despised program. Speaking of the SEC, Texas is be on here as well. They have, I think, the most talented team in the conference. Georgia can certainly make an argument for that. I wouldn't really push back on that much. Texas has a lot of money, oil money, railroad money, probably a lot of influence there in the state of Texas, being the flagship university. Sark has been there for a number of years. They, of course, get Arch Manning back again for, I would assume, his final year in college. I don't know. He may or may not leave to go to the NFL draft after this year. They get Cam Coleman from Auburn. Speaking of Auburn earlier. I just think a lot of folks hate Texas because they feel sort of like LSU, to where they have a lot of these schools in the SEC or Big Ten have a lot of hubris, right? That's kind of obvious for a lot of these teams that they have this hubris built up. Some of it's earned, but some of it's not really earned. And I think for Texas, a lot of folks feel their hubris, unlike LSU's hubris and maybe Alabama's hubris and Georgia's hubris, that it's not well earned because within the last 15 years, they haven't either been to or won a national title. So it's kind of weird to see a program that hasn't won a national title or been to a national title within the last 15 to 10 years, or 10 to 15 years, has so much hubris. Now, look, in general, it's not a big deal because for me personally, I kind of like it. That all these programs have this mentality of saying, well, look, even though we really haven't won anything of like a national title and this whole, title or bust culture, we still have a lot of pride and a lot of history and a lot of talent, money that a lot of you do not have, even in our former conference or in our current conference. So that alone, I think, would definitely make people a lot more despised towards Texas because, again, it's a lot of hubris that, at least in a lot of people's minds, is not earned. But I kind of like it because it gives, it sort of gives Texas both this idea or this, I guess an idea of coping a little bit, but also saying, well, look, we have a lot more resources than most other teams in the conference that we were in previously and currently. And we have the potential to do some things that we haven't done in a long time. So next up here would be Indiana. Now, I toggled a little bit on putting Indiana here as the Despised program. I think most of the country will disagree on this, and I not myself personally kind of do this weird duality here, to where I think Indiana and Coach Sig, a lot of folks actually respect them and have given them their flowers for what he has done there, given where they were before with the tail end of the Tom Allen era and even before he got there. Just one of those programs where you view Indiana as a, in the words of Bud Elliott from Cover 3 and 247, take the checks, take the losses. Not only a program that you feel would be in this position where they won the national title and had a good year before reaching the playoffs. So I think most of the despised people towards Indiana is not actually the majority of the public. Like, let's say if you're a Big 12 fan or an ACC fan or even SEC fan, you don't really see Indiana as like the despised team. You kind of, even though, yes, there is this rivalry with the superpowers in the sport now with the Big Ten, and the SEC, you sort of have to respect it, even though you don't hate, or even though you hate the conference they're in. Now, the folks who do hate Indiana, at least in large part, the folks who really despise them, are, of course, the Big Ten teams. Your Ohio States, your newcomers like Oregon and USC, and you have your other traditional programs like Michigan and Penn State. Illinois, probably, Purdue, probably, but I don't know. Even though that is a rivalry, I just don't know how Purdue really takes that, their football program really seriously, but that's a little other conversation to have down the road. So I think Indiana is more of a regional despisement, but that'll just add more fuel to Mr. Signetti and company, that there's still doubters, even though they won the national title last year, right? Moving on here, we have Ohio State. This one sort of like in the same vein as Texas and LSU. A lot of hubris built up. They're the most powerful program in the Big 12, or they would be the most powerful program in the Big 12 too, but they're also very powerful in the Big 10 where they are right now, and they probably will be for the foreseeable future, at least I would imagine. Multiple national titles. They just won it a few years ago. A lot of folks hate Ryan Day for some reason. I've already done the whole spiel about, a couple years ago when you had, people like Shannon Sharp, Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, and a few others wanting him fired because they, were losing to Michigan, and they, despite the fact they still were going to the college football playoff most years. I don't know. It just kind of felt like a lot of folks had a lot of built-up anger who aren't even college football fans. Like people like the, Shannon Sharps of the world and Stephen A's of the world and Skip Baylesses of the world. They claim to be college football experts, but not really college football experts. Like, could Shannon Sharp name you South Florida's head coach? Could Skip Bayless name you who Maryland's head coach is without doing any research? Could Stephen A. Smith name you the head coach of Mississippi State without doing any research? Probably not. I can name all of those for you. South Florida, Brian Hartline, Maryland, Mike Loxley, and Mississippi State, Jeff Lebby. Okay, so I bet you none of those guys who I just mentioned would get those names correct. I would. I got a text here real quick. Let me answer this real quick. Actually, they should know I'm doing this live, but it should be okay. Okay, apologies there for those of you who were on YouTube and Spotify. I just had to answer the little message there. You know I'm live, but oh well, it is what it is. But anyway, what was I saying before? Yeah. So speaking of Ryan Day. So yeah, you had all these people like Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp, and all these Stephen A. and all of them were just wanting Ryan Day to be fired again, even though they don't really watch college football that much, not really experts, even though they claim to be experts. But like I just mentioned, they probably couldn't answer any of those questions. I just asked them if they were real college football fans, but that's kind of besides the point. But yeah, Ohio State unfortunately is on here, even though they won the national title a few years ago. They're a program that like I guess the despisement here, I think it's of Ohio State again. It's the same thing with Texas and LSU. A lot of it's because they have hubris. A lot of it's because they feel like people feel like that they sort of have a stranglehold on the sport better than everyone else. But look, I like that because in college football you get a lot of that, unlike the NFL. But anyway, moving on here to two more unique examples, if you will, of programs that I think a lot of folks hate for kind of different reasons than the ones we just mentioned. The first four, besides Indiana, would have been kind of easy. Florida State. Now, this one has to go all the way back to 2023. Now, I've already told you guys my thoughts on Florida State back then. I thought they should have been in the playoff. To me, I think they should have been in. If you're going to penalize a P4, at least at the time, P4, P5 conference champ to be in the playoff, 14 playoff, like why would you even do that? Not to mention, big can get injuries and stuff like that. Very, very, very much so a slippery slope. So I think it's kind of obvious that that's where a lot of the hate comes from, because a lot of folks thought they were complaining, and then of course they get blown out in the bowl game against Georgia and the Orange Bowl, and then the following couple of years now with Mike Norvell have been composing of a total of 7 wins within the last 2 years, which is kind of amazing to think about. Not to mention that even before 2023, if things were not, they were getting better, things were scaling up, but it wasn't, smooth sailing his first few years. I mean, they lost to an FCS team, for God's sakes, in Jacksonville State. So, yeah, folks still to this day clowning on Florida State. I do think some of it, in terms of the amount of complaining that people are claiming they have done, I think it's a little bit overblown. I think some of it is warranted. I think at the time, I think a lot of folks were just, upset about this whole agenda that's still around about the SEC being the best in the college football, and they get all of the they just have a lot more runway than other conferences, and not to mention Florida State being left out. 2023 did sort of mark the end, or at least the beginning of the end of the ACC. So a lot of folks, for different reasons, hate Florida State from that realm. Well, at least from the realm of them complaining, but I think the other side of it's a little bit more, at least in my opinion, more applicable, a little bit more understandable, given that them being left out in 2023, again, was the beginning of the end of the ACC. That is going to happen eventually. Now, a lot of folks are still in the mindset of, oh, it won't actually happen. The ACC will be fine. They will survive and whatnot. I just don't see that being the case. I do believe the ACC is going to go away, but we'll talk about that at a future time. Then finally, Texas Tech, more of a newcomer. Now, I don't think they'll have been on this list, at least for this year, if the whole Brendan Sorsby thing didn't happen. Of course, if you needed a reminder, if you've not been watching college football at all, that Brendan Sorsby from Indiana, then in Cincinnati, then all the way to Texas Tech, at least for a few months, was going to be their starting quarterback there. The Gatling stuff, again, I should point this out, happened before he got to Texas Tech, got discovered, and the whole investigation, and now he's no longer on the team. And now apparently they're going to be a part of a docu-series that, no surprise, people like Josh Pate knew about, but they couldn't say anything because they probably signed a non-disclosure, an NDA probably. I'm sure he'll talk about that on his show tonight, which apparently will be his last show for a few weeks, which is kind of weird. Someone who didn't believe in the offseason now believes in the offseason. Just a joke there. I'm just kidding. But the other thing is true. Obviously, he knew about that, and now he can openly talk about it, which is, again, kind of not surprising, given that, he is, as people call him on Twitter these days, the vague post king. But yeah, the whole Brendan Sorsby thing at Texas Tech and the way they handled it. Look, I've already talked about it. I think from a public relations standpoint, someone who does have a degree in that, they probably should have handled it totally differently in terms of just not address it at all and just move on and handle it internally and be the ones who control the news cycle, not the news controlling you. So I think the level of despise is a little bit more different. Like if that didn't happen, and Brendan Sorsby was still on the team, I think the approval rating, if you will, of Texas Tech would be a lot higher. But because of the gambling stuff coming out and the way they handled it, I think a lot more folks have turned Texas Tech into a villain. So it's the classic line from the Dark Knight, and from Harvey Dent in the movie, saying, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. For sure, you know what I'm talking about. So that was Texas Tech. They were a hero, now they've become the villain, and a lot of folks downing on Joy McGuire, thinking that they're going to suck this year because they have to rely on the services of Will Hammond. Even though they still have some decent talent there on the team, and not to mention a lot of the Big 12 really doesn't have the same amount of talent, both from recruiting and the transfer portal, as they do. But I digress again. So most despised programs in college football. Again, LSU, Texas, Indiana, Ohio State, Florida State, Texas Tech. We'll be on here. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. Would you put different teams on here? Would you keep these teams the same? Would you add more? Could have added in some other teams on here like Clemson and Alabama, but I don't really know if folks really despise those programs as much anymore. Particularly, I think definitely Clemson, because obviously Clemson's been on the decline the last few years. Bama, coaching change. A lot of folks just, kind of view Bama a little differently now for some reason, even though the program's still, for the most part, kind of fine. Contrary to what some folks believe, particularly folks who, kind of either hate Alabama or love them to death, and they just become they just get shocked by seeing the program declining a little bit. Although, would it be really that different under Nick Saban that much? I don't know. I don't think any of us will ever know that. But moving right along, I'm gonna get some water real quick, and then we'll go right into our next topic about good old Deion Sanders. Haven't heard his name on this show in a long time, so we'll talk about him here in a moment. Deion Sanders, head coach of Colorado the last few years, has been varying degree of success there. He had Travis Hunter win the Heisman. They won 9 games a couple of years ago. Last year, they won 4 games, I believe, or 3. I don't exactly remember. I think it was around that 3 or 4 range. Same thing as first year. So a lot of folks kind of view Deion Sanders as, we're going to talk about polarizing. We just talked about the most despised teams in college football. Deion Sanders, at least for a time, at least during his first year, was the most despised coach in college football at a time. And I think a lot of folks, given that he was new at Colorado, it was this new shiny thing, and they of course have the celebrity appeal and the attraction that was Colorado football for the first few weeks of 2023. And then 2024 happens, and then Travis Hunter wins the Heisman, and a lot of folks during that year sort of, I'm not going to say fully changed over to going from, Deion Sanders is the villain of college football to, sorry, Deion, we apologize and whatnot. You're actually a really good coach, and you actually did a tremendous job there, even though the year before they won more games than they did the year before that. So, kind of a strange little switch there, but you still had some detractors who were skeptical of Deion Sanders. And look, I'm not saying I was a hater or a total fan of Deion Sanders. I think my opinions of him have been consistent in terms of he's probably good with meeting recruits in the living room and doing it that whole style of recruiting. I think he's probably pretty good in that. His name obviously attracts a lot of attention, but there are some things that I don't like about in terms of the way he manages games, if you will. Him and his personality, I think it is kind of funny how he does all that. But I do think there are some actual functioning parts of his coaching staff and the way he handles games that I do find concerning, if you will. His clock management, not knowing the overtime rules, which is kind of odd. That was brought up a couple of years ago. And not to mention the way he's handled his staff, firing Sean Lewis and bringing in someone like Pat Shurmur, who is a failed NFL head coach. He doesn't have any experience in college football. So Just things like that don't make a whole lot of sense. But, other than that, I don't really have much of a problem with Deion Sanders. Wanted him to succeed, especially coming off of the great year they did have and, having a Heisman Trophy winner. So, I was sort of hopeful that last year was going to be a good year, and it turned out to be a disappointment in terms of just saying, could they keep this thing, above water a little bit, and obviously didn't happen. And then, of course, you have other things like the off the field stuff of Shador and the draft stuff of, him falling out all the way towards the very end of the draft. And, that obviously didn't help the image of not only just, the Sanders family, but also Colorado football. Not to mention them retiring him and Shador and Travis Hunter's jerseys, which, I mean, Travis Hunter, sure, you can retire his jersey. Shador Sanders, I don't know. That seemed kind of a little early for that. Would you think? But and then of course, there's also the health stuff of Deion Sanders with the number of issues he has had. So that is all, obviously very serious and something that, that I have been paying attention to a little bit. And, it is kind of sad seeing what has happened to him a little bit in terms of the health stuff. And he, looks like he's getting better a little bit. So that is good to see. But his future there, I mean, look, again, a lot of folks thought last year he was going to retire or resign because of the health stuff with I believe, what was it, prostate cancer or something? Maybe it wasn't that, but I actually don't remember. But it was, an issue around this time last year that folks were, legitimately worried, and along with myself, that he wasn't going to coach next year just from a medical standpoint. Obviously, he did come back, and he'll be back this year. So there's definitely a little bit of that baked into his future as to like how much longer will he continue. And then there's also the idea of Colorado. Well, how much runway will they actually give him? Like, how much more runway will they actually allow him to continue if this is the trajectory the program is going, where they're going to be going from the first year going 4-8, go 9-4, terrific, great year for the first time in over 10 years. Then you sort of, go back down to reality the year after that, and they win, well below 6 games. So that is interesting, thought, will the folks there, has he built up enough runway? Has, do the folks at the administration there at Colorado, did at least still think that this is a tangible path for them to continue to going on? That's one thing to consider. Also the health thing, right? This Deion, once he continue doing this, given he has had several health issues, and look, that's his home thing to decide. He can make his own decisions. Obviously, I mean, he's a human being, he's not a robot. I mean, hopefully he is well enough. At least shamefully for me, I would much rather him continue to coach and have him be around college football, because I think it's, it is a very good thing for him to be around. I do agree with Josh Pitt. Yes, there is the quote-unquote Deion tax, but it does seem like that tax has expired, and a lot of folks kind of just like, all right, it was cool for about a few months this first year, and now it's just, oh yeah, Deion Sanders is at Colorado now. It's almost the opposite has happened, where you've seen the decline and popularity of Deion Sanders from the non-football crowd. But I don't know. Yeah. So my own opinion here is, look, the health stuff, you'll obviously have to address that. It seems like based on what we can tell, what's been put out there publicly, he's going to be there. So that's good in terms of dealing with the health stuff. Now, again, will the administration, will the folks over there, how much runway does he really have there? How much time will they give him to sort of ride this out and let him, move on his own terms? That's probably more likely. I think them firing him would be, I wouldn't call it I guess it would be a mistake, because it does sound like you're kind of quitting on him a little bit and sort of going that direction. So yeah, I think he'll be around as long as, I think from his personal standpoint, meaning the health stuff, as long as he can continue, which is good for college football. As long as Deion is there, as long as he continues to be actually one of the more prominent voices in the sport. Some of the things he's done off the field, like going back to even last year, bringing up, hey, I wouldn't mind having an actual spring game where we can actually play teams instead of just playing ourselves. So there are certainly some things that if you look at Deion Sanders, yes, he can, disagree with a lot of the things he's done from a managed standpoint in terms of managing a football game, managing his staff, and managing certain aspects of a college football Saturday or whenever they play games. And then there's also his personality, which again, I don't really have a problem with it. I know some folks do have a problem with it, but I don't know. I just feel like Deion being around and some of the things he has said, at least some things that I actually do agree with, that are good for the sport and healthy. But I don't know. I mean, look, it is his own decision, and his you know, sort of his career to model here if he wants to continue going on, or does he want to take a step back and focus on um, other things of his life. But I think as long as he can stay in college ball and continue to be a even if, let's just say, hypothetical scenario, he decides, hey, for health reasons, I'm resigning, and I just want to, you kind of relax a little bit to a certain extent. But maybe he says, hey, I still want to be an ambassador for the sport of college ball. Maybe I can, try to help in some way as much as I can by improving the sports image. I don't know, just things I'm throwing out there. But yeah, his future at Colorado, I don't know. Again, I think a lot of it is the ball is in his court. I think the administration there at Colorado, I would imagine they are probably giving him enough runway to say, you can stay here as long as you want, bro. Like, totally fine with us. Moving right along here, and then we'll get out of here. More of a shorter show today, unfortunately. But, I guess they're not trying to make it sound like, this time of the year is really, bad or anything like that. It's just, especially this week as well, with myself going on vacation for the 4th of July holiday and whatnot. Just a lot of things happening, so can't really necessarily, I don't know what's the right word, like do a long form show. Just though, I mean, I guess this is still kind of our typical length, if you will. But anyway, see record projection here next, and we'll wrap it up. You get our graphic here ready to go. As per usual, we have our fancy graphic system. Okay. So, Texas A&M, best case, worst case scenario, the record projection series, if you will, as graphic is loading up on YouTube. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here. May just have to re-download this and try it again, it looks like. So stand by. I'm not really, what in the world? Happens in that round now and again. That's the one thing of Restream. It's a good system, but there's definitely, it has its drawbacks, and it has minor issues with it when it comes to uploading graphics and stuff like that. But anyway, I digress. So I guess we will have to try this again, but if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and we'll just move on. Now it decides to work, so oh well. So as I was mentioning, the team record projection series continues with Texas A&M. Made the playoffs last year, finished 11-2, losing to Texas being their only loss of the year. And that makes it now, I believe, 0-2 versus Texas in the SEC since they've rejoined together in the same conference, which is kind of bizarre. But anyway, A&M, of course, they bring back Marcel Reed. Yes, they dealt with some injuries in the spring, so that is something to keep in mind. Even with some of the losses they've had at receiver, they still have good players around. And they have Ruben Owens at running back. They have Mario Craver coming back. They have Terry Bussey coming in. They have Isaiah Horton from Alabama, and I believe also at Miami. So he's been been all over the place, it seems like. And like I mentioned, they have Marcel Reed coming back. They have mostly the same defense, I think, most from last year, or mostly from last year. I believe it was the Damian Sanford guy, the Sanford kid out there, or the linebacker, the senior. He was injured in the spring game, so we'll see if he'll be ready to go. But they still have a very, very loaded team, and that's also in addition to the fact that they ended up they lost their offensive coordinator, Colin Klein, to his alma mater, Kansas State. So new offensive staff there, even though it's who was it, the Holum Higgins guy, or Wiggins, whatever his name is, who's been there for I think a while. So that's no real. I don't think the offense will change that much, but it'll be interesting to see if there is some tweaks to it. But I don't know. Who knows? But their schedule is somewhat manageable. And look, I would put it up here on the screen, but you know, uh, sharing the screen and whatnot is kind of a confusing thing here. I'll be taking off the graphic here, so we'll just keep the graphic on here and whatnot. But anyway, so their schedule, they begin with Missouri State, week 1. Then they get Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham Company comes to College Station. I believe these two played each other in 2015 in Houston for that kickoff game that I think don't have anymore. So that's kind of interesting. So they do play them. That's week 2. That's a noon kickoff on ABC Eastern time. Then they come back and they play Kentucky at LSU week 2. So back there again from the scene of the crime, if you will, from the LSU perspective, I guess. So yeah, they're back there again, and then they get Arkansas at Missouri, FCS team for Halloween. Then they play Alabama on the road. Then they get South Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas to end the year. So the last 3 games of the year are very tough, but then in between that, a mixture of, you have your occasional tough game on the road, like with the LSU game and the Bama game and kind of Missouri. But you also, at least from the conference standpoint, get, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, some of the more manageable teams on the schedule, right? You get Kentucky, you get Arkansas, and you get South Carolina. Granted, one of those is on the road, but the other 2 are at home, so that definitely helps a lot more. So I think if you're an A&M fan, if you're someone who, is doing the whole over-under thing with A&M, don't have this pulled up right now from FanDuel. I'd imagine their over-under is definitely above 8.5, but I could be wrong on that. Those are definitely 3 games you would want to have on your schedule. Again, I have nothing against those programs. Those are the programs that must take the losses and whatnot. So that's their purpose, if you will, being the punching bags of the conference, unfortunately, but it is how it is. So the schedule definitely is friendly around the beginning of the year. There are some tough games, but, the last 3 there, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, most of that depends on where those programs are by that point in the season. I'm mainly referring to Tennessee and Oklahoma. If those programs are struggling, like Oklahoma has under Brent Venables, mostly they've done the whole roller coaster thing where they go from 6 wins to down, to 10 wins, and then back down to 6 wins, and they go to 10 wins. So it's very erratic. We'll see where they are towards the end of the year. At that point, that's week before Thanksgiving. Same with Tennessee, but I think Tennessee and Josh Heupel a little bit more or less, at least. It's not very unpredictable, or at least unpredictable in terms of like sustainability. Oklahoma, I think it's a little bit more cyclical. Tennessee, definitely more sustainable. What they've done there of Josh Heupel, so I'm not really looking at them to drop off significantly. Could be wrong on that. And of course, before that, you do get South Carolina. Could be interim coach by then. Who knows? But definitely our toughest games of the year are going to be Texas, LSU, and Alabama. 2 of those are on the road. One of them is at home, being Texas on Black Friday once again. So those are definitely your 3 games. You'll be dogs, and the rest, I would imagine, you'll be favorites in. Oklahoma, again, we'll see. That's sort of a conditional situation with just where the team is. So on the graphic here, I'm sure if you're on YouTube, you've already been seeing this or looking at this on Spotify. You'll just have to follow along to my voice here. Best case scenario for A&M, 10-2. Again, if you can somehow navigate through this schedule and maybe you lose to, the worst case is you just lose to Alabama and LSU or LSU or Texas, like 2 of those 3 games, and at least get one of those. Probably Texas at home. I think that's definitely possible. Injuries, again, a big thing here, which is where the worst case scenario comes in. If the injuries to, someone like that Deion Sanders guy on the linebacking core, if that's a major problem, if some of these, some of these games that end up being a little more tougher than it looks like on the face, at least on the, on the surface, particularly Missouri and Oklahoma, that could be definitely a challenge. And not to mention, too, the situation with Marcel Reed. And now, I'm not a Marcel Reed hater. I do think there are some limitations. Last year during SEC Media Days, if you're new to the sport somehow, or if you didn't know how Media Days work, they usually bring, of course, when they bring the coaches in to talk to the media, they usually bring in players. And usually it's their star players or someone who or a group of players who you'd imagine would be captains on your team. And last year, A&M, a lot of people assumed, oh, they'll just bring Marcel Reed with them, right? Well, that wasn't the case, and they decided not to. And a lot of folks, including Bud Elliott, made a big deal about that. And at least at the time, I kind of agreed. It's like, yeah, kind of weird how you're not bringing your, starting quarterback to SEC Media Days. It just kind of sends a very, very, odd message of, well, he's our starting quarterback, but he's not good enough to, go to SEC Media Days and represent the offense. But, I digress. That's, definitely a weird choice there. So, there's definitely a lot of folks who've had issues with Marcel and his ability to, break down, especially when, whether, teams behind or they're just really struggling and things really start to crumble with him. And not to mention, he's not the best thrower in the world. He can run around, and that's an aspect I do like. He's very, very mobile. But his passing attack, or at least his passing abilities, are very, very limited and whatnot. So there is some legit concern there, and that's where that 7-5 bakes in. If he just ultimately regresses a little bit, then that's kind of the hinge point. Because again, I think the rest of the team, outside of other injuries that have not been resolved yet, I think it's functionally pretty good. So I think the most reasonable, in my opinion, is probably 9-3. I think you could lose to LSU, you could lose to Miami, you could lose to Texas, or you could beat those teams and lose to other teams, which should not be ideal. But it is the SEC. Weird things can happen. It's a conference that, in a lot of ways, is sort of a NFL junior when it comes to the way the schedule works out, and you have teams, cannibalizing each other a lot, and weird things like that. Show my rest of my notes here. I think that's it for the show. So yeah, best case scenario for A&M 10-2, 7-5. Worst case and most reasonable 9-3. Like I said, we'll be doing shows the rest of this week. Going to next week pre-recorded. So that will be the way things will be going here for just a little bit. Let me just graphic off the screen. So yeah, that's the sort of the modus operandi going forward. So that will be the way we will be doing things, at least for the next 7 days, if you will. Then we'll be back doing live shows. So we're not going on any vacation. I know there's a lot of folks who will be going on vacation. Someone with the initials of JP will be having his last show for a while. Contrary to him saying there's no off season, but I guess I get it to a certain extent. Yes, it is a long season, and he's married now and whatnot, and he has to appease everyone in the family somehow, and you cannot be a workaholic. But I digress. It's a personal thing or a decision with him, but I respect it. But it is kind of ironic, though, a little bit jokingly, that he was the quote-unquote, off-season, denier, and here he is taking a break for the second straight year. So it's kind of interesting that, somewhat of a, I don't know, kind of a hypocritical move, if you will, but I don't know. So, yeah, we're not taking any breaks here. We'll still have shows. And even when we do take breaks, like we're kind of doing, we'll still have stuff available to you guys. Pre-recorded shows, unlike, again, some folks in the industry who can even do that, at least out of courtesy. But again, I digress. It's their decision, not mine. I think that's pretty much it. Anything else to mention here? Again, we'll have those shows available to you starting on July 4th this week. So special show there, patriotic show. I mean, not really. I mean, it's our usual show. I actually recorded it last week. Recorded one yesterday. I recorded a show yesterday, and that will go live some point next week. I'll get the graphic out. The thumbnail made tomorrow before we head out, because we're leaving Thursday. We'll be away for about a week or so. So we'll have that ready to debut probably either on Tuesday or Monday. I'm not really sure yet. And of course, we'll have the extra pod. We'll be doing that. Actually, I think right after this. So how about that? Anyway, take care. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week. Of course, I'll be seeing you guys live again. So enjoy your 4th of July. Enjoy your holiday, celebrating America's 250th. Be safe while you're traveling. Obviously, a lot of folks will be driving around and stuff. So, just be advised and whatnot. And also be safe on the holiday. Of course, a lot of folks will be going out on the lake and whatnot, as well. Yours truly will be somewhere in the southeast. And an undisclosed location. I would just check the socials for any updates on that, how that's going. But anyway, enjoy the rest of your week. Take